Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ambassadors and guests and friends of the American Academy, a very warm welcome to all of you to an evening I would describe as an evening of great expectations and multiple identities. The great expectations, I think I probably don't need to explain to you. The size of the house is one very welcome sign of those great expectations. The multiple identities I may also not have to explain to you, but nonetheless it's a pleasure to illustrate exactly the meaning of that. We have two distinguished guests who will be speaking, and they are both celebrants of multiple identities generally, but specifically vis-à-vis the American Academy. Kati Marton, whom you've all come to hear, is a member of our inner circle from the very beginning, having been with us with her husband Richard Holbrooke as the founder of the American Academy. But this semester she has another identity, which is her very own identity, and that is her role as a writer in residence at the Academy, working in fact on a book, researching it very diligently, a book about Angela Merkel. But as a journalist, a television journalist, and also a well-known author, this is obviously not her first book. It will not be her first book. She is recently the author of True Believer, Stalin's Last American Spy. And in addition, she is the author of Paris, A Love Story, Enemies of the People, My Family's Journey to America, The Great Escape, 9 Jews Who Fled Hitler and Changed the World, Hidden Power, Presidential Marriages That Shaped Our History, Wallenberg, The Polk Conspiracy, and Death in Jerusalem. Those of us who are scholars and work usually much too slowly can envy that pace of knowledge and publication. Similarly, our introducer tonight needs no introduction, but is also a figure of multiple identities. Volker Schlöndorff, obviously one of the best-known figures in German and world film, as the director of The Tin Drum, The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum, and Homo Faber, among many others. My friends here describe him as a figure who makes films of the unfilmable, which I think is a nice description and perfectly apt. Kati Marton has been working on a project with the title "The Enigma of Angela Merkel." And when she came in September, we wondered exactly what that enigma was about. But it turns out that even if she wasn't an enigma then, she seems to be an enigma now. So the title turns out to be profoundly prescient, and that may be one of your secrets. So I introduce to you Volker Schlöndorff with enormous pleasure, who will say a few words about Kati Marton. Kati will give her presentation, and then as you see, we have this format which has been working very well for us this semester, and that is a short dialogue between our presenter and her introducer, which will be followed by a series of questions and open discussion from the floor, after which you're warmly invited to a reception next door. Welcome again, and Volker Schlöndorff.
Thank you, Michael. Dear Kati, dear friends of the Academy, is of course, emotion is part of it, and it is a special evening for us who've been with this institution for more than 20 years now, and friends with Ambassador Holbrooke for probably another 5 or 7 years before that. So here we are, still orphans somehow, but we try to live up to the expectations he may, from above there, put into us. No need to introduce Kati Marton much more than Michael Steinberg did already. She is, as you will see, an extremely vivid, multilingual personality, multiple identities, as I myself claim to have. when I first left Germany to go to France, I was warned you will lose your identity. Then when I went from France to America, I was warned again, and I've been warned again and again about losing identity. And my answer is always, unlike virginity, which actually you do have to lose sometime, identity is something you gain every day. And you will feel this in Kati Marton's presentation and in the books Michael Steinberg run just the titles. You see it goes from her parents' life in Budapest under Stalin until they're leaving the country, fleeing the country after the '56 revolution, how she and the rest of the family followed them, how then they grew up in the United States. I mean, a whole odyssey in itself, which helped her to better understand how other refugees before her, the 9 Jews who fled Hungary, and that is Frank Capra, Michael Curtis, and many others who made their names then in Western culture, changing their names from Hungarian to more or less Anglo-Saxon, but remaining as Kati herself, who served us a Hungarian meal tonight. Deep at core, once a Hungarian, forever a Hungarian. That's also helped her to understand better the character of Noel Field, a true enigma in her book True Believer. He grew up in the United States, and as a student was attracted to communism, to the promise to right social and political wrongs, and whose idealism finally led him to become a spy for Stalin while working at the highest level in the State Department. And few people could understand, but how is it possible that one and the same human being can follow such path filled with such contradictions? Well, if you have multiple identities, you can have the insight to understand that. So as a product of the East, still remembering the Cold War under Stalin, as a woman, of course, as someone who's been close to power and has seen how tough it is to get things done in a democracy, and with her good psychological insights, I think Kati Marton is the ideal author to present and to explore our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who some of us seem to understand and others do not, or do even less as time goes on. I think Kati Marton will address such questions as how did her East German background influence the political career in the West, having known Angela Merkel long before she became a chancellor. I remember a story she told about how strange, how amazing, how difficult it was a couple of years after the fall of the wall to find herself in Bonn in this political world of the West. And one day she told a friend of hers, also from the DDR, very depressed, I think we're never going to make it. We're never going to understand them. And the next day or a couple of days later, she came back radiant, and she said not to worry, because we will catch up with them, but they will never learn how we function, because our masters, Stalin, Soviet system, is gone, and they can never find out how we function. So maybe there is the enigma. Another question, of course, is how much gender is a part of our ascension. I mean, we never had a queen, and we even less had a women chancellor. Another question, how is she putting up with Putin, Trump, Macron? I mean, as they would call them in German, Alpha-Tierchen, alpha males. I once asked her, when I saw on television these images, what you called photo opportunity, where cameras are allowed to run, but you don't get the sound. And she was walking with Medvedev in Sochi somewhere on the beach. And I said, so what were you really talking about? And she said, well, I told him that Putin had told me that he was swimming out there 100 meters every morning. And Medvedev said, yes. And she asked him, do you do that too? And he said, 1,200 meters. How come she is more popular abroad than maybe in Germany? And of course, also in some countries, more hated than at home. And the big question now in the situation where she finds herself in, why did she stand for re-election in the first place? Was it because she seemed to have to fulfill the promise, we will manage, wir schaffen das, that she felt that if that had not happened, maybe she would not have stood for re-election. So there is a lot of question a long-term study can explore. Curious to hear tonight where you are at now, whether there is a mystery or is a growing mystery. I was always, as a friend, convinced with Angela Merkel is what you see is what you get. There is no hidden agenda. She is as smart and as plain as she looks. Anyhow, she is at a crossroads now because her politics of creating always the most comprehensive consensus among opinions, parties, and people seems to come to an end. She was used to embrace everybody. She blurred differences, denied distinctions, lost clear contours, both for herself and for others. Conservatism lost its meaning in the CDU, so did liberalism. Social democracy looked like the conservative chancellor's brand. Green became the color of her politics. One big happy family run by a benign matriarch, Mutti. And this is now over. A new right wing is growing overnight under the surface of harmony, which she thought she created. The political currents went their own way, out of sight and out of control. The Christian Democrat Party tries to redefine its conservative origins in Bavaria already. We have seen it this week in the Social Democrats. We'll see tomorrow whether the young ones will follow this harmonizing politics any longer, and the liberals, anyhow, they lost already. So one thing is for sure, that for the moment, Angela Merkel will remain chancellor, so you're not going to lose your heroine, whether she likes it or not. And for a storyteller such as you, the most interesting period of Angela Merkel's career may just commence. And I'm very curious to see how you will explain us who our chancellor really is, both as an insider and from the outside. Kati, welcome to the Academy.
So, thank you, dear friend Volker. So I'm very happy that Volker admitted to emotion because I feel it every time I'm in this room. So the good news is that thanks to Volker's generous introduction and remarks, I'm going to shorten mine because really you covered so much of the territory, and really it's such an act of presumption on my part to, in this room full of smart and experienced and even powerful people. As I said at dinner, many of my sources are in this room, but they shall remain unnamed. It is an act of presumption for an American woman to come here and write a biography of the Chancellor. But I've never shied away from bold and brazen acts. So here goes another one. I have to tell you that insofar as I've had proximity to this most elusive Chancellor, I owe my friend Volker that, because the very first time that I met Angela Merkel was actually the day before the terrible attack on New York City. Richard and I were here for the inaugural of the new Holocaust Museum, and she was not then. She was. Can you hear me? Everything all right? Okay, I'm getting a signal. Everybody can hear me, even in the back. It was before Merkel was Chancellor, and Richard had not long before negotiated the peace in Bosnia. And on that note, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the ambassadors of Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and you do us an honor with your presence. Thank you very much for being here. So Mrs. Merkel asked to meet Richard, and Volker organized a wonderful lunch, just a very small lunch at his home. And the other person present was Susan Sontag. And I must tell you, Susan Sontag never paused to draw breath during the entire lunch. And so I went home with vivid memories of Sontag and only the foggiest memory of Angela Merkel. And of course, the next day's dramatic events swept all of that clear out of my head. This book is very much a departure for me. I will spare you. Michael, your introduction was also way too kind, and I loved every word. But so I will spare you the list of my prior works, but I do want to say that this is an enormous departure for me, because normally I choose fairly obscure characters, such as Raoul Wallenberg and Folke Bernadotte, the first Arab-Israeli negotiator, George Polk, Noel Field, and through those little-known characters, I try to paint a broader canvas of historic events. I deeply admire historians and the work they do, but I don't think that history should be left to historians. I think that we can only really understand events if we feel them, and we are better able to feel events through a personal narrative. And so with my subjects, I try to bring my readers closer to historic events through vivid storytelling. So the reason it's also the first book I've ever written that wasn't my idea. It came to me via my publisher, Simon & Schuster, and it took me a year to agree to it, because she's so famously elusive, and I thought the challenge was beyond my powers. But of course, then along came the election of Trump, which changed the political landscape and made Merkel that much more important for Americans to understand, because for many of us it seemed that the German chancellor was all that stood between us and the abyss. And of course, in my own homeland of Hungary, Viktor Orban has kind of identified himself as the anti-Merkel, and he too seems to be gaining ground, and so those two forces from the East and from Washington made me realize that whatever the challenges of this assignment, I would attempt to write what will be the first major American biography of the Chancellor. I recently, again thanks to Volker, I recently had the occasion to be in a smallish group with the Chancellor, and in the past she's always been warm and friendly, and on this occasion, and the setting was a church, and she was really in her element. She was with her own people. As you know, she's a pastor's daughter, raised in the Lutheran church, and she was very much at ease. And then she saw me, and I felt her mood kind of change because I was an outsider, and because obviously I was there for different purposes. And I recalled Saul Bellow saying about his biographer that his biographer was like a shadow in the garden. And I suddenly felt like that shadow, and I kind of retreated. And I don't know if you remember, Volker, you even said, "Why did you pull back? Why didn't you? Why weren't you your usual forceful self?" And I said, I just felt a little uneasy about intruding into her comfort zone. At the same event, the pastor asked if she read or if she reads books about herself, and she said, "I do, but I don't recognize myself." And I wanted to jump up and say, of course you don't, because you don't give any access. You don't give any time to your biographers. And here I am, here's your chance. Here's your chance to reveal who you actually are. But I don't think that's happening. As a piece of good fortune for me, her official biographer has just given up for the same reason. No access. And another biographer whom I've befriended, and perhaps she's in the room, showed up once at a public lecture given by Herr Dr. Sauer, her physicist husband, a public lecture, and spotted my friend, the biographer, and very politely had her evicted. And this was about quantum physics, this lecture. So there, ladies and gentlemen, you have an idea of the challenge facing me. Herr Dr. Sauer, the first gentleman of Germany, will not be Brigitte Macron anytime soon. So why am I attempting to scale this Everest of biographies? 3 words: Wir schaffen das. Transformed Angela Merkel's leadership and her legacy, and persuaded me that this was the right project. How did she become the Flüchtlingskanzlerin, the Chancellor for Refugees, this supremely step-by-step, that's her motto, step-by-step cautious politician who never even visited a refugee camp until 2015? I think partly the story of Reem, which is familiar to many of you here. Reem was the Palestinian refugee girl who, in an open forum, stood up and in perfect German said to the Chancellor, "I would like to be able to make plans for my future the way my German friends do, but I can't because my family has not been granted asylum." And at that point, this lovely child of 11 started weeping, and the Chancellor spontaneously walked over to her. And I've looked at this tape over a dozen times, and she looks, the Chancellor looks extraordinarily caught up and moved in the moment and starts stroking the girl's hair, but sticking to her script, said, "Well, we cannot take everybody. We have to. We have rules. We have laws, etc." And German media attacked her for being cold, for being unemotional. I don't think she was. I think she was unaccustomed to that unscripted moment and that level of emotion. And roughly 6 weeks later, she announced the Willkommenskultur, the Wir schaffen das. I'm not saying that those two events, that there's a straight line between them, but because obviously there were dramatic intervening events, namely when again the aforementioned Mr. Orban kept thousands of Middle Eastern refugees trapped behind barbed wire under very rough police escort, and in Budapest Keleti train station, and this was not the Germany that Angela Merkel. This was not the Europe, I should say, that Angela Merkel identified with, and she was horrified. And one of the threads of my biography will be tracing how she came to this really life and legacy changing policy of Wir schaffen das. In part to the fact that the United States is shamefully absent from this historic moment, and our historic role as the asylum state. My family and I were granted asylum in the late 50s. The only thing I'd like to correct, Volker, is that I have no memories of Stalin. That was a little bit a small point, but just for the record, for your next introduction. So the combination of those things spurred me to embark on this Everest of a biography, and then of course there's also a personal element. And so when Richard founded this academy in 1994, and it's nice to see Gary Smith with us tonight, who was such a very, very close partner of my husband. Welcome, Gary, back to Hause. He did it as a way to strengthen the bond between our two countries, and now that bond has been very badly weakened, and I'm hoping that maybe I can play a tiny role in bridging our two people. After Trump's election, some months after, Chancellor Merkel said that we Europeans must take our destiny in our own hands, which was really an astonishing departure, an astonishing statement, which ended 70 years of an extraordinary relationship in which Washington had played midwife to the Federal Republic, built on the ashes of a broken wreck of the Third Reich. Now it seems that the relationship has been flipped. Very reluctantly, Angela Merkel has assumed leadership, both moral and political, of the West. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxons, London and Washington, are in full retreat. And as I said, she is our last best defense against populism, xenophobia, and a Europe of barbed wire and bigotry against outsiders. So America is now curious about Merkel. Who is this person beyond the headlines and beneath her own carefully curated version of herself? So here are some early and very presumptuous conclusions. And I see, I just now met yet another German biographer of the Chancellor, so I hope you'll ask me some tough questions later. As far as I'm concerned, the more biographies, the better. I'm of the mind that the more serious writing there is on the subject, the more attention is drawn to that subject. So early conclusions based on 6 months of research, but it's not my first time in Germany. I was here as a news correspondent for an American television network in the early 80s, and then of course as Richard Holbrooke's partner subsequently in the 90s. So part of the key is her Lutheran upbringing as the daughter of a very stern pastor who espoused a sort of Christian socialism. My visit to her hometown of Templin, in a very remote corner of Brandenburg that time has forgotten, was eye-opening. It was here that Angela was brought up with the obligation to look after the weaker members of society. She grew up, by the way, in the company of handicapped people as part of this community, and for her that seemed like a perfectly natural state of affairs, all deeply important in her formation. At this church gathering that Volker kindly took me to, the pastor asked the chancellor, do you mind being introduced as a pastor's daughter? And without pausing, she said, but that's who I am. So putting aside any doubt about her identity. But she is also trained as a scientist, a problem solver. She's a workaholic who loves untangling problems. I actually think she likes crises. I think she's bored by politics. I wouldn't be at all surprised if later we found out that this period that we're all holding our breath watching evolve, the coalition building, that she's energized by it. She hates pomp, and frankly admits that vision is not her thing. When the head of the World Trade Organization recently asked her for a little bit more of a romantic narrative for Europe, since Europe has now been reduced to Brussels, which means bureaucratic excess. There's no romance in that. And she said, I'm no poet. And that's kind of an understatement. So I feel that just because a historic figure wants to remain private, should not deter historians or biographers. Our job is to work around obstructions. World leaders always want to control their own narrative. And obviously I'm not writing an authorized biography, but I will do my utmost to be fair and to capture the human being behind the enigma. And I must say that having, in the 17 years with Richard, having observed a great many public figures, I don't think of them all as fools, liars, and knaves. I don't think that they're all out to rob us for their personal enrichment. They exist, obviously, but I wouldn't want to spend the depressing few years writing about any of them. But let me assure you, especially the Americans in this audience, this will not be a narrative of German politics in the last 3 decades. Nothing empties an American room faster than the word Bundestag. Anybody leaving yet? So I believe that character is destiny, and I also believe in human agency and the ability of extraordinary personalities to shape events. So, of course, I believe that biography is necessary for understanding history. I'm not interested in psychobabble or in gossip, although if you have some good gossip, come and share. But I'm very interested in the actual influences that shaped Angela Merkel. So the obvious starting point for me is a paper trail, a search for clues in everything that she has ever said in her long public career since the fall of the wall. She does her best to be boring and uncontroversial, but sometimes she reveals herself. So, for example, I recently found a speech that the Chancellor gave in 2014 in her childhood church in Templin. Churches are where she's most at home. In this speech entitled "The Freedom of a Christian," she spoke of her faith as which is something that she very rarely does in public. She said, among other things, that, quote, "God doesn't want puppets or robots, people who just do as they're told," which is kind of an interesting assertion, which explains much regarding her view that those of her fellow East Germans who have not seized new freedoms, who complain about the good old days, how great it was in the Stasi state, are, well, partly responsible for their own fate. "I'm an Ossi and I seized the moment," is her message. "I left my secure position as a scientist at age 35 and began my new life. And so should you." She doesn't put it quite so bluntly, but that is definitely her message. So this is yet another thread, the continuing East-West divide, the inner wall that still exists almost 3 decades after the actual wall was torn down. On a recent trip to Weimar with some of my fellows, we stumbled on an Ostshop, so-called, selling little bits of nostalgia from the Stasi state, model Trabant cars, and signs that say things like, "The West will never understand us." And another one showing a little boy who says, "When mommy goes to work, I put on my apron and start sweeping." So I have to admit there are aspects of East German social engineering that I find quite charming. But of course, you can't pick and choose the bits you like in a totalitarian society. You get the whole package. So why is there such a level of nostalgia in the East, and why so much bitterness still about unification after what we in the West naively assumed had been a euphoric and generous merging of the two? And why, more to the point, did so many Saxons vote for AfD, clearly partly a protest vote against the status quo and against Merkel herself? And why is she so supremely private and cautious? The answer is that she is a triple outsider. From the East, a scientist, and a woman in a male political culture and society. The role of her Eastern formation and the lack of trust was bred into her and was key to her survival in the Stasi state. In the laboratory where she worked for many years in Adlershof, she had 2 lab partners, and she knew that one of them was a full-time informer. So caution comes from deep sources. People have been asking me why it is that Merkel, a scientist, chose politics after unification. I think that actually the more meaningful question is why she had chosen science in the first place when she excelled in everything but sports. She was pretty bad at all sports. But here's her own answer, very revealing. Merkel speaking, "I think I was a good physicist, but not an outstanding one who might win a Nobel Prize. I chose science because it allowed me to work close to the truth." So in a state where truth was dangerous and the province of the very few, dealing with facts was an enormous luxury and a privilege. So she chose science. But since she also wanted a Nobel Prize, obviously an ambitious woman, as she should be, she became chancellor, which is kind of the political equivalent. So temperament is destiny. They say about FDR, the greatest American president of the 20th century, that he was a second-class intellect with a first-class temperament. Merkel is blessed with a crisis-proof temperament. steady and even, rarely drawn into emotional outbursts or reckless decisions. Boy, what we wouldn't give for a leader like that. The night the wall fell is a great example. The rest of the city caught up in this mad, intoxicating, euphoric moment, everybody surging across the newly opened wall. That night was Merkel's sauna night. She kept to her sauna routine. She went to her sauna, followed by her usual beer at the pub, and then leisurely strolled across the Bornholmer Strasse bridge, had a look around, went home. 2 days later, went off to Poland for a science conference. So that is Merkel's way, steady as she goes. And we are about to find out if in our ill-tempered, polarized times, Merkel's quiet, steady, boring style, she's described as an energy-saving system, can still function. Here is why I think she can. The fact that Germany, unlike her neighbors, has done, this is one of my favorite German words, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. Most of you understand that, even with my bad accent. The processing of the past, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. I love it that there's a word for that. The processing of the past through great pain and effort. No class trip to Weimar, the spiritual and cultural capital of Germany, is complete without also a visit to Buchenwald, the beautiful forest just outside the capital of German classicism, where thousands of Germans were incarcerated and tormented by their fellow citizens. The result is that Germany is not only Europe's economic engine, it is also its best citizen. Merkel can take some credit for that achievement in her 12 years as chancellor, though it probably started in 1970 when Willy Brandt dropped to his knees in a gesture of unforgettable humility in the Warsaw Ghetto. But if any European country is immune to the dangers of chest beating and martial thumping, it's Germany. Two other words are unavoidable this evening: Donald Trump. If you were to create two humans who were each other's polar opposites, you would come up with Donald Trump, emotional, ignorant, incurious, intolerant, disdainful of facts, and Angela Merkel, the reverse of every one of those qualities. But she can work with him, minimally, but she has to work with him and knows how, because she's so experienced in dealing with macho, blowhard men, Schroeder, Kohl, Bush Jr., whom, by the way, she came to like in the end, Berlusconi, Erdogan, and Mr. Macho himself, Vladimir Putin. Wir schaffen das is how she manages them all, quietly, doggedly, patiently, never letting them get under her skin. Though when the former KGB agent, Putin, released his black lab, Coney, well known that Merkel, like so many people who were brought up in the East, is frightened of dogs. She froze, but silently. She never argues with them. She is not drawn into fights with them. She wears them out with her patience and an icy blue stare that is very unnerving to men who are used to making people tremble. Then when Putin or Trump are done bloviating, she gets in a few well-chosen remarks, and I'm told that they pay attention. But she always waits until they've had their eruption. She hates to be thought of as cold. Quote, I find it irritating when people say that. She explained, "I don't like showing my emotions in a way that people expect. For example, when I'm very happy, I can also be very reserved. You don't always have to explode with laughter. Other times I might look serious or seem sad or unhappy. I'm simply concentrating on my thoughts in those moments." I recall a brief encounter I had with her this past summer when I asked her what was the secret to her survival in this all-male world of cutthroat politics. She was, as always, surrounded by aides and by a throng of refugee volunteer workers. Still, she paused and she searched for the right answer. You could see her actually thinking. "Endurance," she finally said, and of course it was the right answer. She is the opposite of glib, which is a very rare quality in a politician. But again, you might well trace this to her formation in a police state where spontaneity or calling attention to yourself was very dangerous. So more than anything, she hates the mob. Heidenau, the Saxon town that turned on her with raised fists and obscenities when she visited in the middle of the refugee crisis, repelled her. For Merkel, the choice came down to the old Germany, racist, violent, anti-immigrant versus the new, open, tolerant, generous, and Christian in the best non-exclusionary sense. So far, that Germany is ascendant. 1 million refugees have been granted sanctuary. The next chapter in her extraordinary journey is unfolding. I, for one, am confident that in her habitual, systematic way, she will form a coalition. I think Thomas Bagger, who is here this evening, is predicting perhaps as early as tomorrow we will know. It seems to me that Germany is alternativlos. Nor did the elections reveal a country that is reverting in any way, in any serious way, to its darkest history. Yes, the AfD is in parliament, but with a lower percentage than anywhere else in Europe. Those countries that have not done the hard work of self-examination that Germany has done. Preparing it for, and this is key, preparing it for the generous welcome that the refugees were granted at the Munich train station. Unforgettable scenes, really, made one very proud. But the danger of the AfD, and in recent months I've spent some time with some of their representatives, the danger is that the AfD doesn't seem very dangerous. These are not your grandpa's cartoonish Nazis. These gentlemen in tweed and ladies in power suits and pearls. They sound reasonable up to a point. It's important to listen hard to what they are not saying, merely implying. Let's face it, whatever Angela Merkel's temperament and her specific limitations, Europe, wealthy and still peaceful, shimmers before an overwhelmingly poor continent, many of whose most desperate also happen to be Muslims. Refugees whose arrival in great waves fuels populism, nationalism, Brexit, Trump, and anti-EU sentiment is not a problem that will vanish, and building fences is not the answer. Europe needs a collective immigration policy, and soon. America's absence from the field could not have come at a worse time. Angela Merkel is by no means the perfect leader for our times. Overly cautious, a terrible public performer. By her own admissions, she is missing the charisma gene. She doesn't connect well to large audiences. And when I asked one of her closest aides in her tiny circle if the chancellor will articulate a vision, a more inspirational style during her final years in office, the aide in question shrugged and answered, "People don't change at her age." Merkel is different in private. Everyone tells you that, right, Volker? Witty, very dry sense of humor, does great imitations of her fellow heads of state, and does a very mean Saxon accent, apparently. Warm to her friends, loyal. People complain that her circle is too small. It is very small. But it isn't only that she's no longer young that makes a dramatic alteration in her persona hard to imagine. Don't expect trust from someone with her East German foundations. And here's another obvious fact. How could she trust when women have never risen far in Germany? It's the only European country without ever having had a queen. The men who stood in her way have not fared well. She has heeded Machiavelli's lesson not to wound but to kill her opponents. She has avoided Hillary Clinton's mistakes. She does not call attention to the obvious fact that she's a woman. She has a private life that she guards jealously. No one has trouble imagining her post-chancellorship. Hiking, cooking, music, and travel to the United States. She loves America. Not Trump's America, but America. Her first overseas trip after the wall fell was to California. Long a dream of hers. So, in conclusion, regardless of the final composition of her coalition, Angela Merkel's place in history and world history is assured. Just how did a woman, a scientist, rise from the ash heap of a failed empire to become the most powerful leader in the world? That is my ultimate challenge as I begin to climb this steep mountain of a biography. Thank you very much for your attention. So,
in your vivid way, already in this lecture, you painted a person whom I did recognize, and I think you nailed these three important vectors: the Lutheran upbringing and her sense of obligation, which we saw when we saw her among these pastors.
Yes.
At the Oberlin House, which is in Potsdam, an institution for the blind, mute, deaf. So that's where she took an entire evening from 6 to late at night to spend time there and to talk with these people. And it came out indeed, as you said, that this is the people she grew up with. Because she explained us that in the DDR there were many social measures for the poor or for everybody, but not for the poor in spirit and in mind. Handicapped people were eliminated, were not been taken care of, almost in the fascist tradition. So it was her father who created an institution or worked at an institution who took care of these people, and young Angela had to be there and play with these children and spend her days with this. And so from early on you have this this abnegation of your teenage wishes and this and that, because you have a special responsibility.
yes.
And I remembered after the wall came down in '92 or so, on the first walk through Brandenburg, somewhere near Templin, that I felt she had a calling by the fatherland. No, a patriotic calling. We have to do right by the opportunity history is offering us. And that reminded me of another trustee, a founding trustee of ours, Fritz Stern, who, when the wall came down in a lecture here, said Germany had three crucial moments, I might say 3 opportunities. The first one was under Bismarck, when after the war against France, due to industrialization, there was kind of a German hegemony for the first time in Europe, and Bismarck used all his skills as a diplomat to appease everybody around, all the countries around, because he did not want Germany to be overpowering. However, the Germans wanted to enjoy their new power. He lost the election, the Kaiser took over, and the next thing was, race to armament and First World War. The second chance, he said, was during the Weimar Republic, and that was missed as well, and Hitler came to power, and we know what the consequence of it was. And the third chance, he said, is now the reunification. Whether you want it or not, you're going to become economically the most powerful agent in Europe, and it remains to be seen if there is a politician who can handle that. Indeed, as if it came with the territory, somebody grew out of that territory, and so far has been handling it well. So really, I think in your description, Lutheran scientist and her temperament, what we are born with, the genes, who did not know yet. I mean, she didn't have an ambition. I like that she wanted to have a Nobel Award or not be a physician, but she didn't. I don't think she ever had a clear plan. I remember when she went before. Becoming or when she was about to be the candidate for the election for chancellery, as chancellor, she went to see her opponent or her competitor Stoiber in Bad Tölz over breakfast to tell him, "You do it." This is so Angela Merkel, because she knew her hour will come.
Yes.
And not to rush, endurance. There is one more male who has who has to be used to the bone, and then will come my moment. But it is not. It sounds like a Machiavellian. It is not. It is kind of spontaneous, instinctual at the moment. Let it come. See where it goes. And one more thing, I think you were so right to point out, is there is, I don't say an inborn paranoia, there is simply a nurtured paranoia through the system she woke up in. And that is why she has, even at quantum physics lecture, someone who she considered a spy expelled. Often, more than once, I felt unwanted, and I, just like you did, you feel one look and I better get out of here. You know,
and you're her,
like
you're
don't
her
don't go to your first unless you are called. And with her, it's very much that, and this makes it. So difficult to write about her or to know. She does not want to explain herself, and she does not admit close contact. Not in competition with your book, but for a moment I thought now it will be interesting to do a long-term documentation, film documentary, where I would kind of over the next 4 years follow her and so on.
It's a great idea.
And when I brought even up the idea, not to her, close to the entourage, who seems to know her well. Well, I felt another Iron Curtain coming down in Europe. And I thought, but I would give her in writing that nothing of this would be published as long as she's holding any function, an office or anything. And then I thought, forget it, she's not going to change. That's the way she is. And this overprotective, or however you called it, makes it difficult, but makes it worthwhile. And I think you're on a good track. Also, you see, I don't have any questions, but her attitude.
Maybe they do.
Just sum up what struck me is her attitude when she is with women is completely different from when she is with men.
Yeah.
And I know from few women who are not in politics, or film producers, a journalist, a public relation affair, and so on, who supported her from the very beginning, kind of a fan club, groupies. And when they speak about meeting with her, and they had Kaffeekränzchen and whatnot, and where they spoke, a totally different person emerges.
Yes. There was a famous power lunch with a group of women in Washington that was organized for her, and all the women. I've interviewed them, came out and said, she's so for real, she's great, unguarded. So yes, she does. These were all very powerful women as well, but she does have this, well, with good reason, right? I mean, men have always underestimated her, which has played incredibly in her favor, because starting with her mentor, Helmut Kohl, who referred to her as his Mädchen, and but she was never, well, she was referred to as his Mädchen. You're quite right. Nowhere have I found Kohl, but there's a reason that she was referred to as Mädchen, and that was a very belittling thing to you would not call a man. Mein Kerl.
Mein Jüngelchen.
Mein Junge, yeah. So Volker, if you don't have any questions, maybe we should open up. Okay, there's yes, Jackie. We need. Can everybody wait for, and ask of both of us, please.
Yes, I wanted to ask, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I wanted to ask you, do you think that the way that Chancellor Merkel has handled the challenges of European integration has been influenced in any way by her experience of the economic challenges of German reunification?
Such a smart question. You were here for that, the German reunification.
I'm out of it.
I wasn't around for Stalin or for German unification. I want to repeat that. Do you want to take a whack at that, Volker? Yeah. So do you think?
I guess I have to, because I was introduced to Angela Merkel by Birgit Breuel, the head of the Treuhandanstalt, who asked. I had been dealing with Breuel for the studio in Babelsberg and different other things for French investors, and then when the deal was done, she said, "Now I want you to meet a person who lives on the same floor as I in these apartments above Wilhelmstraße." And it was Angela Merkel, and it was a circle where we met once a month for in a totally informal way at each other's houses in turns. And we spoke once about our upbringing, our schooling, our teenager times, our years of formation. and second, about the economic challenges of the Treuhand and the reunification. And I was, like many others, of course, critical of what the Treuhand, the way the DDR was sold out, auctioned off, but Reul, of course, was adamant this was the only way it could be done, and Angela Merkel was very, very keen on asking why is that, how come the East German industry, who had a whole market in the former Soviet bloc countries, why don't you continue to build trains for Uzbekistan and for Kazakhstan? Why don't you continue to produce spare parts for the cranes that are in the third world and in the Eastern world in every port? And questions like that. So I can say she was very, very curious, and well eager to learn.
Yes, yes. I would say that from my time in the East, and one still carries that inner wall between the East and the West, I get the feeling that it's less about the economy and more about hurt pride, that they feel as if they, not everyone obviously, but some feel as if they were an occupied country, and that perhaps that might have been alleviated if a new name would have come up for the country instead of East Germany merging into the existing Federal Republic of Germany, and if they had been treated with a little bit more care. It's a lot of it has to do with people's pride, self-esteem. We overestimate the role that economic reason plays in people's political decisions. We're seeing that now, that there's a huge irrational emotional element in politics, and I think that East Germany was perhaps given short shrift. They were just expected to stay grateful.
But Kati, then how do you feel about the fact that she seems to be less loved by her former compatriots than by the people in the West? How does she feel about that?
Well, how does she feel about that?
Yeah.
Well, as I said in my comments, she's impatient with this notion that it was our moment and we should grab that moment. But I'll give you a telling anecdote. When I went to her pub, where she'd gone the night of the wall came down to have her weekly sauna and beer, and the same bartender was still behind the bar. And there was a picture of the Chancellor having a beer over the counter. And so I said to him, so how has it been for you? How are you doing? And he said, well, for me, it was already too late. But my children are doing well. And, one is a CEO, the other is a techie, and so weiter. So in other words, for people of a certain generation who had only known socialism and for whom who were reduced to robots and puppets, it was a tough change, and they haven't made it.
And how do you explain? As you said, she loves America.
Yes.
I can confirm that.
Yes.
But I don't understand why.
Yeah. Well.
I'm not.
Well, she
not
doesn't
being
love
ironical.
Trump.
I mean, because in '92, as you said, she made this first trip to California. and she was impressed. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I know why I love America, because when the GIs came and they brought the America House and Butterfinger and AFN and jazz and movies and everything. You know, we loved a way of life, and that's the way I grew up. So I cannot even imagine living. I mean, I feel somehow American, but how could that be for someone who had no? What information could she have as a physician in Adlershof or wherever, or in
I think
in
the
Leipzig?
idea.
It's an idea.
I think it's the idea of America, and she is a person for whom liberty, such a hackneyed word, freedom, have very real meaning. I mean, this is a person who every day on her way to Adlershof passed by the wall on the S-Bahn. And so she was a virtual captive for 35 years. And so for her, freedom is real. And America stands for freedom for her. I think that the only way she can explain to herself what's going on today in America is she blames the system, that we have a very flawed election system, which I can't disagree with. But she does not think that America has changed fundamentally. I think she feels that there is a nasty black cloud, if you will, that's passing over the world from east to west. But I think that she is so deeply in love with the things that America stands for. And I think it was very shocking for her when a very close aide of Trump, somebody in the White House, said that the great Emma Lazarus poem, "Give me your wretched, your poor, the earth's refuse," on the Statue of Liberty, that was actually added on later. That was not a part of the Statue of Liberty. I've heard tell that to her that was absolutely shocking because the Statue of Liberty for Merkel and for most of us, I am a refugee myself, the Statue of Liberty is the greatest symbol of America, and to start tinkering with that is shocking. And to her especially so. Yes, we have, and you can ask about things other than happy to talk about other things too.
Yeah, many articles appear about Angela Merkel these days, putting her down.
No.
More and more. I have read quite a few in German newspapers.
I thought it was a question.
I don't want to mention the names of the journalists. Why do you think is this? And we remember, of course, Schulz calling her a sleeping pill, a Schlaftablette, and all these things. Well, that's still the election tum-tum, etc. But there's more and more ourselves, the Germans, putting her down.
Well, yes, that's more or less to be expected. She's been in office for 12 years. 12 years in the digital age is a lifetime. It's astonishing. You know, after FDR, I referred to him as our greatest president. Of the 20th century. Sorry,
that's what
Martin.
you said.
I did say that. Greatest president of the. You know, we passed a law that you couldn't have more than 2 terms. Now she's been in office as long as FDR has been, but in a different era. So it was a very, almost a brazen thing for her to run again. And that too, I have to draw in great detail on how she came to that decision, but it's not the normal way of democracy to have somebody. I happen to think that she's the best thing that Germany has at the moment. Yes, Maureen.
Just to get on with that theme a little bit, it dawned on me as you mentioned the negative press about Angela Merkel in Germany. whereas her press in the United States could not be more positive,
Yes.
generally speaking.
Yeah.
The same is true in England of Winston Churchill. Americans love Winston Churchill more than the British do. And sometimes, you need maybe a distance that America has from Merkel and America has from Churchill to know their greatness, the way the people up close and personal don't.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you see any parallels there.
Yeah, no,
because
no,
Winston
that's
Churchill was on the world stage for a very long time, too.
Yeah, people get tired, bored of, they want change. They want. I think it's a normal function of democracy. Yes. We have two questions back there. The lady in white. And
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to make a comment in response to the last question. Don't you think it's less about long-term exposure than when Americans think of Winston Churchill, they know only the piece about World War II. That's all they know. They don't know anything else. And they certainly don't know anything about the post-war Winston Churchill. So I think it may have to do with limited knowledge or limited exposure. You know only a little piece of a much, much longer history.
yes, I think that's absolutely true. And also, the Wir schaffen das, as much as it was, a fantastically brave and humanitarian move, it was also rather chaotic. And for Germany, chaos is a terrible, frightening thing. And so for a moment, she kind of lost. Actually, she lost control, and I'm going to describe in much greater detail how that came to pass. But I think it shook, after the original excitement and self-satisfaction that Germany was now the most welcoming country in the world, then came the morning after the reality. Okay, now what? And so there's been a lot of kind of 2020 hindsight on what should have been done, and I hope to come back, Michael. I hope you'll invite me back so that when I'm farther along, actually when I'm done.
Well, this should be a long-term project because, as I said, there's probably quite a few surprises ahead of us. But as to this moment, of now we are world champions in goodness.
Yes.
But then there came the backlash, but that's when she said her second, I think, most important line when she said in German it was, wenn ich mich jetzt dafür entschuldigen muss, dass ich Fremden ein freundliches Gesicht zeige, ist das mein Land nicht mehr. If now I have to excuse myself for showing a friendly face to strangers, this is not my country anymore. This is even more Luther than Luther. This is really, here I stand, I cannot do otherwise.
Right.
And in the language, you see the expression "mein Land" is a typical East German expression. None of us West Germans would say this. Das ist mein Land oder so. It's zwar nicht, aber in the East German pride of the little DDR or so, they were all the time referring to unser Land, unser Land.
Interesting.
And this is, I think, again, formative for her. She wants to be part of a country she is proud of.
Yes. And for 35 years she was not.
But in a sense, who wouldn't? But
exactly. Yes.
There was another question in the back there.
How are we doing for time?
Hi. As you mentioned before, there are so many biographies about Merkel. So why do you think yours will be different? Or what's the new angle in your book?
Okay. Are you? I'm just curious. Are you German or American?
I'm German.
I thought so. So There are, of course, mine will be the best. I'm just joking. It's my Hungarian humor. America doesn't have a full biography of Merkel. There are slim tomes about her economic policies, very, I shouldn't say this, but really boring stuff. Nothing that captures the human substance and the really interesting journey, which is not a conventional political journey. And as I said, that this woman coming from a failed empire became the Soviet Empire, became the most consequential leader of our time. How did this happen? And don't underestimate the enormous achievement for a woman to reach that. God knows we in my country haven't been able to do that. We came close, but she's been at it for 12 years now. So I think it's an inspirational tale for our daughters. And in fact, when I asked her this question, what is your secret? It was actually my daughter who said, Mom, if you get close to her, would you ask her? because I'd like to have a big career too. And so when she said endurance, which was really, with one word she nailed it. It means you don't get discouraged. You don't let the blowhard guys who snicker behind your back that you have no style, you have no personality, you have hair but you don't have a hairdo. These are all things that were said about her that she's had to live with. I mean, no wonder she guards her privacy so jealously. So I think it's not so much a political tale as a tale of human endeavor and achievement. Yes. There's a gentleman there.
Hi, I'd just like to say thank you very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it very much. And my question was...
Can you identify yourself?
So my name is Connor. I'm a student at Hochschule für Medien und Wirtschaft in Berlin. I'm an Erasmus student and I came from the UK, so I'm here for just 1 year. And so my question was, I was very interested in learning about, as being a biographer, what is the line between becoming so close to someone that you have to learn about in such depth? Like you were saying earlier that you're a very forward person, but sometimes when there's intimate moments with Chancellor Merkel, you feel like you have to draw back a bit.
Right.
So I was just a bit interested in knowing where's the line.
Right. Well, alas, I'm not such a forward person. I have to... Gary, why are you snickering? I resent that. No, I mean, I'm not a shrinking violet, but I'm not... come to my rescue. I'm not pushy. Yeah.
No, you're not.
I mean, you can't be a journalist if you're just going to wait to be called on. But I don't think there's any threat at all with this project of me getting too close. Yeah. I'm willing to live with that danger. I think that the way. But look, I did a book about 12 presidential marriages and how the interaction between the president and the first lady impacts on policy. From Woodrow Wilson to the Obamas, and I got to interview all the former
first ladies
and presidents, because this was about marriage in the highest place, and I found that the least useful, the least information came from the principals, because they are so dug into their own version of events. And they're not talking to Kati, they're talking to history. They want a certain version of themselves recorded. And therefore, of course, you try to get to them, and you try to get them to sit down and talk to you. But far more useful is to circle around them. And this will be particularly challenging now because normally the people I write about are no longer in office, so that people aren't that afraid that if they say something wrong, you know, their jobs are on the line. But so this book will have a lot of. I mean, I've made wonderful friends and connections here, but a lot of people don't want their names cited because they're still working for her, and so but that is not a deterrent against getting as close to the facts as one can possibly manage. And I'm not writing for the news cycle. I'm hoping that my book will be in that library in 50 years.
Well, Kati, did I sense a little bit of a frustration when in your presentation you said at the beginning I thought there was no mystery. Now I'm convinced there is.
Well, of course, you know, the closer you get to a subject, the more complicated, as it should be. You know, who wants to write a book about a simpleton? Who wants to read a book about a simpleton? So yes, this one is exceptionally complicated. Yes, sure.
One last, maybe.
And I'm Shirley Adams from the U.S., and a guest here at the Academy. You kind of got close to it, Kati, and I thought you were going to answer this question, but just recently. Obviously, to me, she has a very strong relationship with her husband. It's steady. It's something she depends on. It nurtures her, and I'm sure it works both ways.
Yes.
So, are you willing to talk just a little bit about what you're going to how you're going to address her marriage?
Yeah, okay. And then this gentleman. But let me try to answer this one. So yes, Shirley, that's a wonderful question, and it weighs on me as well. Because he has said that he is of no interest to history, and therefore he wants no part. Look, the lid that she has kept on her family was such that it was only recently revealed by Stefan Cornelius, my friend, and the biographer who's given up. For now, that her father and grandparents were born in Poland. People didn't know that because she said no family searches, and I mean they were of German background, but they were living in what is now Poland. But the husband is a presence and a key presence, and I'm slowly, you know, I don't want to write a tell-all book. This is not that kind of book, you know, what goes on behind closed doors kind of book. But he's certainly a very important psychological ballast to her, and for a very long time, for 35 years. And it's impossible to imagine such a career for a solitary person. Unimaginable to have had, especially one that doesn't trust easily, to have not had a partner would have been impossible, I think. So he is. And I'm slowly piecing it together, but again, I don't want people to be indiscreet or those are not the kind of books that I write. But an important role played nonetheless. Okay, we have two gentlemen. You, sir?
We should probably at some point move.
Oh, okay. Okay. Would you like to ask your question and then you? Yes.
I'm a former politician. I'm a social democrat.
Welcome.
And I must admit I'm missing one word in describing Angela Merkel, and that's the word ambition.
Oh, but I said that she wanted a Nobel. She wanted the Nobel.
She wanted to be chancellor.
Yes.
And she doesn't want to go out of office as a failure.
Right. No, that's a good point. But I tried to you don't get to be chancellor if you're not ambitious. And when I said that I was using the Nobel figuratively. There's no Nobel for politicians, but she wanted the equivalent, which is But you're absolutely right. Yes. Ambition in my book is not a bad thing, if it's married to something important. You agree? Yeah, ambition makes the world move. Yes, sir.
The very last.
Yeah.
And we can continue to talk outside.
I'm a German. I'm just for the heck of it. Imagine she were to step down tomorrow.
Oh, God.
How would you describe her legacy? I mean, if you look at Wir schaffen das, you yourself said it's a mess. Europe is a mess. Brexit. Without her, there probably wouldn't have been a AfD. So, in other words, why is she so great?
Why is she so great? Where do I begin? Well, she's
because she's not giving up.
Yeah, exactly.
She's trying to clean the mess before she leaves.
Part of the reason that she ran again is because she doesn't want to give up. A weaker person would hand it over to someone else, but she's Germany. Germany is not only, as I said, the economic engine of Europe, it's also the moral center of Europe, and that's not a small achievement. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.